People, when they find those meaningful connections, and there can be many of them, some really huge, some smaller, but lead in steps that kind of bring us to a different understanding of not only ourselves within, but how we relate to the world.
Hello, I'm Rachel Astarte, and welcome to Self-Talk. My guest today is Ash Marshall Odell. She's a spiritual teacher, a psychic medium, a certified personal coach, Reiki master, and author of the book Lightbound, A Healer's Journey Through Trauma, PTSD. Let me try that again. Trauma, PTSD. I'm going to start all over, actually, because I don't want to.
I hear you. I have had those snafus. I was recording once and I kept saying archangel instead of angel. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
I know.
I'm giggling at myself.
Okay. So I'm going to start over. Okay. Hello and welcome to Self-Talk. I'm Rachel Astarte. My guest today is Ash Marshall Odell. She is a spiritual teacher, a psychic medium, certified personal coach, Reiki master, and author of the book Lightbound, A Healer's Journey Through Trauma, PTSD, and Anxiety. Welcome, Ash.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So I would love for you to start out by telling the listeners how you got into your field and what your calling was.
Yeah, that's funny. My background actually is in business and teaching. I was a public school teacher for a while, and I had various jobs. I call it job ADD, really. So I learned a lot, and none of it really truly suited me. I adored teaching, but the way that the teaching was going, having the children memorize and then forget after testing, didn't suit me. And I was a stay-at-home mom for a very long time, and I had a childhood that was very difficult in many, many ways. So mental, physical, emotional, sexual, and religious abuse. Wow. And that came out in my mothering. I was a very, very overprotective mother. And I also, of course, had, issues because when you're modeled certain behaviors, when you don't know any different, you grow up. So I had changes that I wanted to make. And so I began therapy. And in a trauma group, we went on a retreat, and we went to this crystal shop for fun. And I was drawn to these crystals, like a magnet almost. And went back to the house that evening and put them, I just knew where to put them on myself. Wow. And literally energy just whooshed through my body. I'd never experienced something like that before. And that was sort of the beginning. We'd been reading a lot of books, such as Riso and Hudson Enneagram type, as well as Untethered Soul, a whole lot of books. I did not know anything about sort of metaphysical at all. And it was a very interesting journey for me. And I learned a lot about myself as well as everything else. And that was just sort of the foray. So I began Reiki, and then a lot of other things just sort of opened from all of that, and found myself doing what really fills my life with purpose and flow, freedom, love, openness, wonder, and so much bliss and joy. I adore doing what I do now. It's
Yeah. I was looking at your website, and there's a lot of talk there about meaningful connection. Can you help others understand what that means to you? What is a meaningful connection for you?
So if you were to think of it just in a regular way of learning, we learn all types of information all the time, right? A lot of it isn't very personal. However, something that we learn will come in, and it's all of a sudden, it's like you light up or you're drawn to it. And from that, you open up into a whole new, we'll call it world, where something really speaks to you and you learn all about it. And people, when they find those meaningful connections, and there can be many of them, some really huge, some smaller, but lead in steps that kind of bring us to a different understanding of not only ourselves within, but how we relate to the world. And those meaningful connections can be so helpful and fulfilling and really beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm thinking of my listeners hearing that and thinking like, I wonder if I've experienced that before. How do you know when you have a meaningful connection, when it's rather than just, I'm really kind of into that. Like it sounds like you knew when you saw those crystals, I have a meaningful connection to that.
Not at all. I
Oh,
didn't know anything about crystals except for my daughter's fourth grade science project where you put the string in the solution in crystal. That's what I knew about crystals. Like
uh-huh.
seriously, that was it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first started out, I was actually really fearful of I didn't want anything to do with um, psychic or intuitive or anything. I was just, I
Mm-hmm.
was like, no. And it took me a while.
Okay.
And as I became interested in things and started learning, some things popped in. For instance, Reiki, I didn't really know. I didn't know about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, one day, all of a sudden it was like Reiki, and it was just there.
Mm.
And there were tons of Reiki teachers all around, but I knew I wanted to go to this Reiki teacher.
Okay.
And there are things like that. We all experience it. So as a child, we we have those, even if it's a teacher, because meaningful connections can also be with other people.
Sure.
And even when you're a child, there's that teacher that most of us have
Mm-hmm.
that you just adore them and love them. And there's this wonderful, wonderful feeling that you get when you're with them.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people carry that all the way into adulthood because they brought something to that relationship that helped you in a very deep way. And it's lovely.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not always apparent immediately what your meaningful connection might be, right? But
Exactly.
something when you saw those crystals said you wanted to keep learning more about them. So that sounds like even if you didn't have conscious knowledge, there was a connection there, maybe on a more metaphysical level.
Yes. Well, when something happens that is so outside of your sort of worldview,
Mm-hmm.
you have a tendency to pay attention. And when we're just open to experiences, even in that way, we look for something sometimes. So being open to even making some connections, it could
Mm-hmm.
be a word, a feeling, something that we see that we keep noticing again and again and again.
Right.
That's something to pay attention to because it is you, something within your subconscious saying, hey, this is important.
Mm-hmm.
Pay attention.
Right.
So, yes.
Right. And the powers that be around us are so good at giving us many chances to try and connect. When you said, something that's coming up again and again for you, it might be, some kind of synchronicity, right? Where you're thinking about something and it shows up. And yes, and these are all, I call them love letters from the universe, but saying, I
Beautiful.
got your back, you're good, I see you. Beautiful. So, and yes, those connections can be other people. They can be, even just a word or an experience or a ritual or a thing. For those who are listening who think that sounds great, but I have no idea how to make that happen. Can we create meaningful connections for a fulfilling life? And if so, how?
We can do it through choice.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So choosing to learn from an experience, even when something is really not positive, like you just have a difficult experience or conversation or a circumstance, when we learn from that, what does that have to teach us? Because anything that we do, no matter what's going on outside, it always comes back to us and our own choices, right?
Right.
So when we figure out, well, what was that? What is the connection here? What is the learning? What is going to help me?
Mm-hmm.
That's a meaningful connection. And we can do that with every aspect in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So everything from security and safety to creativity and our feelings to how we are out in the world, our willpower, control, letting go of control,
Mm-hmm.
our heart, all our relationships, speaking from our truth, listening, and then choosing, planning, and of course, our higher connection to all that is meant for us. So there's learning that we can bring in no matter what it is, that we make the meaning and we choose and grow from that. And it's really lovely. Not easy, but
yes.
lovely.
Well, I was going to say, and you pointed out something so important, that it may be some challenges that we're going through that are teachers to us, and oftentimes they are. And for some, it can feel like if I'm going through a difficult time, or if things don't seem to be where I want them to be in my life, I feel stuck in that. Is there a way to shift that? Is there a way to kind of, change the perspective when we do feel stuck?
That is both very simple and very complicated.
As everything is.
Right. Yeah. It depends on what you resonate with, what works for you. Mm-hmm. For some people, therapy. I actually am a huge proponent of people going to a therapist. Like, that's just, I feel important when you are having a very difficult situation to help you process through, work on your beliefs, reframe in that way. Yeah. Coaching can be helpful. Energy work can be helpful because not only are emotions chemical messengers, they're also vibrational. And so I, from my personal experience, have found energy work, body work, massage, melt, because we store our emotions in our physical body. Yes. And so when we do that, we are kind of restricting the flow. And when we are able to open that flow and allow that, those stuck chemicals move. Mm-hmm. So also creating a ritual for yourself, meditation, if you're able. And there are lots of different ways to meditate.
Sure.
All of these things can be helpful to figure out what is in your deepest and highest good and within you, because all the answers come from within. And sometimes we just need help to get to them.
Right. And to trust that we have the answers. That's a really hard one. And speaking to what you opened with, it's really hard when your patterning is not supportive of trusting your own intuition or trusting your own self-talk. Yeah. So just to jump back, and I think your story might help a little bit. What was an aha moment for you that helped you to unlock that part of yourself and begin to trust yourself and your intuition?
There were many such instances, because when you have CPTSD, you're involved with all of those emotional hormones, because thoughts and emotions, when coupled together, create beliefs. Mm-hmm. And if it begins in very early childhood, there's a lot of things that shift and change, and some things that remain stuck. So it takes longer to clear those patterns that you spoke of, because some of them are, I call it sort of deep scars, or neural ruts is what they're often called. And so shifting out of those, you kind of do it in layers. And so when we go to make those changes, those aha moments can be small ones. So for instance, one of them was the Riso Hudson Enneagram type, discovering what my type was, mm-hmm. 1. 2, understanding what my triggers were. And learning to breathe through those triggers without reacting. That was the first part. That was so hard. And then you go to the next part where you start learning how not to react internally. So in other words, where you're shoving down your emotions, or saying no, or freezing, or have an anxiety attack. It is a very progressive journey. Mm-hmm. And each phase helps you to feel better, to level up, to free yourself in ways. And every part of the journey, because we always cycle back around. So for instance, I'm a Enneagram type 1 mm-hmm. with the 2 wings. So, the reformer with the helper. Okay. And so you come back and you also have a core wounding. And each time you'll come back around, but from a higher stance, because you have new capabilities and new tools and new ways of dealing. And all of these things help us to learn to trust ourselves. So for me, my initial message was trust yourself. Mm-hmm. Perfect trust and perfect love. Mm-hmm. You have to find it within. Mm-hmm. And so it's sort of uncovering who you truly are beneath all the programming and patterning mm-hmm. that you had by virtue of growing up in whatever familial group, social, cultural, religious, etc.
Yeah.
All of that plays a role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's really different, obviously, for each person. But
Yes, it's
what I'm
very.
hearing is the commonality is to be patient and to understand that it is a process, and one that, you know, we practice on a daily basis. And I think, I know this is true for some of my patients too. Um, they see a vision of themselves somewhere out here that they want to be, and they cannot figure out how they can get from here to there. And it's really important to remember that that person is already here,
Yes.
and just needs to sort of have some of the dust pushed away so that you can really see the gem shine underneath. And that takes time. You know, I think of archaeology, right? They're uncovering an ancient civilization. It doesn't happen all at once. It takes years sometimes to carefully remove the dirt and get those gems and those beautiful artifacts underneath. And we have all of that, you know. So how, so if we're on this journey and we're just doing our thing, right? Uncovering our stuff and slowly, can we also, or how might we also encourage or help others to do the same?
I believe very much in the power of hope
Hmm.
and inspiration, sharing. And it's why I wrote and published my own book. Um, One, most of all, was to overcome my own shame and fear.
Mm-hmm.
That was a huge step for me.
Mm-hmm.
And two, when we see other people doing this work, we have that feeling and that knowing within us that we too, if someone else can do it, I can do it too. Right? It won't look like that. That's their journey. That's how they did it.
Right, right.
But I know I can get this going for myself and accomplish as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And just by being on your own path, that's also a way to help to elevate or express the positive aspects of this work to others, just by being who you are, perfectly imperfect, right?
Yes. So much yes on that. Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's very important. um and you spoke just a moment ago about how you're a big advocate for therapy. What is it about therapy that you think is helpful? And I want to preface it with, as a therapist myself, there's a lot of misconception about what therapy is or can be and why people go to therapy. And one of those misconceptions, of course, is that it means you're broken, that there's something wrong with you, that and there's almost a shameful surrender to your awfulness that you have to go see a therapist. I'm getting a vibe that that wasn't the case with you. Can you talk about what it is about therapy that you think is so important for all people?
Yes. So when I host the Attune to You podcast, that's mine, and I talked about this. So if you were to imagine yourself wearing glasses with hundreds of lenses in that, and on each lens is a different thing. So perhaps on one, there's a thin film that partially occludes one side, different colors, patterns. Perhaps there's a crack along the bottom of one of the lenses.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can't see anything, like your eyes are completely covered and occluded by these glasses, you're not really seeing what's truly out there.
Mm-hmm.
And all choices are made based on your perception of what you are seeing. So perhaps you see this crack. And so every time you step, you're making this really weird step forward to avoid falling on the crack.
Right.
As you go through therapy, you're peeling off lenses, lenses and lenses and lenses. You get clearer. You actually think differently. You make different choices. You feel better. It is truly simply a way of, one, getting to know yourself truly and deeply. undoing some unhelpful beliefs that, for instance, where and when I was brought up, it was that religion was all about women being the fall of man, all our fault.
Wow.
And that we had to pay for it for our whole lives because Eve sinned, and all women must suffer and be punished. That was what was taught me in church. That was a horrific feeling to carry. And I felt deep shame, including just having, menstruation. That was deeply shameful because it was tied to Eve's sin.
Wow.
Those were ugly beliefs and not true
Of course.
at all. It was horrifying. And I was just a child, and this was taught to me. And so when we are able to let that go, it not only helps us see better, but we feel better and differently about our own selves and our relationship with the rest of the world. And so it's deeply helpful to address beliefs. It helps our relationships with everyone and everything else, including the most important one of all, the one to ourselves.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And is this the sort of coaching that you do?
No, I don't. I am a certified personal coach, but I don't actually coach.
Okay.
I do more just energy work with people. I help people get in touch with themselves through meditation. I teach classes on how to do so. All of these things I feel are important. And when we bring all the different things together, mind, body, spirit, it creates a much better whole life for people to thrive.
Absolutely. And so something like the work that you do would be a wonderful supplement to therapy, for example.
Yes, that is exactly
And we
it.
need a team. We need, it takes a village, right? It takes a village of healers to help us. And I think that's a beautiful message to send today too, is that you are not alone.
Yes.
And that you have people who know how to love and hold you, and and like yourself, you've made a living out of supporting people. So that said, how can listeners find you, Ash?
Oh, easily. My website is sacredjourneyswithash.com. Also on Facebook and Instagram if you would like to connect with me there.
Beautiful. And I will have your links in the show notes to make sure everybody can find you. Ash, thank you so much for being on Self Talk today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.